I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes! Oh, thank you. Yes, it's me. Oh, please. Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. Oh, thank you. Keep clapping. Keep clapping. Clap for the summer miracle. How would we know that you wanted the summer miracle if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. I just got back. I just flew back from Alabama, and boy, am I sick of flight delays. If anyone has flown this year, you know what I'm talking about. You'll never get anywhere on time. But I am happy to be home. Had some great events in Ohio and Alabama over the long weekend. In Ohio, the Libertarian Party of Ohio's yearly conference, or I guess every other year conference, because on even years they have conventions and on odd years they have conferences. Also spoke at an event for ending qualified immunity in Columbus with Accountability Now Ohio, and then went down to the Rally Against Corruption in Montgomery, Alabama, to help the congressional candidate Jonathan Reels and the soon-to-be announcing, she's actually not allowed to say she's running yet, but I am, soon to be announcing that she's a House congressional candidate, Portia Shepard, down there in Montgomery. Had a great time. Now I'm back home, right here, same Spike place, same Spike time, for an amazing episode of My Fellow Americans. Why is it so amazing? Because you're here. This is a Muddy Waters Media production. Check us out on everything. All social media platforms and venues and applications, all podcasting platforms, venues, and applications, everywhere that there are things. We are on all of them. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Anchor, Twitter, Periscope, iTunes, Google Play, Float, Twitch, all of it. All of the podcasts, all of the everything. So be sure to like us, 5-star us, follow us, subscribe to us, comment, share, do all the algorithm things right now. Be sure to let Big Tech know that you're going to utilize their product fully. That'll show them. Huh? And be sure to, if you are subscribing to us or following us on YouTube, don't just subscribe. Hit the bell. Hit that little bell, because when you hit the bell, your phone explodes with notifications every time we go live. And I want that. I don't want you to miss anything. And be sure to share this right this very second. The last thing I want is for you and your closest loved ones to miss out on a roughly hour-long Libertarian podcast on a Wednesday evening. That would be terrible. Gift the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids love it. This episode, of course, is brought to you by the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, the second largest caucus in the Libertarian Party. And no, that's not a joke or a typo that we do to recent events. This is the second largest caucus in the Libertarian Party and the fastest growing one. And if you'd like to become a member, go to the Facebook group Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus to become a member today. And if you want to become an official voting member, which means literally nothing because we don't vote on anything, it's a joke. But if you want to become a voting member, then go to muddiedwatersmedia.com/store and pick up some Waffle House Caucus buttons or a Waffle House Caucus shirt. Delight your family with this absolute nonsense. The Gravy King, Cumberland Cannabis, safe, viable, ethical, and effective Delta and CBD products. If you would like to buy some cannabis from Cumberland County, Tennessee, then here's how you do it. By going to cumberlandcannabisco.com. I know that's what you were thinking when this started. How can I get some CBD and Delta 8 products online directly from a nice rural county in Tennessee? Well, look no further. cumberlandcannabisco.com. Joe Solosky is running to be the next Pennsylvania governor. Joe Solosky is the key to Pennsylvania's success. And if you'd like to help Joe become the very first libertarian governor ever, then go to help him at joesolosky.com. That's JoeSoloski.com. Mudwater, the most appropriately named sponsor we've ever had here on Muddy Waters Media. If you woke up today and said, my gosh, if I never have another drink of coffee in my life, it'll be too soon. I'd instead like to have masala chai, whatever that is, cacao, mushrooms, turmeric, sea salt, cinnamon, and literally nothing else. Well, folks, I have some fantastic news for you. If you go to muddywatersmedia.com/mud, you can get all of those things I just said in a tin. They give you a tin. Muddywatersmedia.com/mud. It's about 1/7 of the caffeine, just enough to wake you up, and not enough to have panic attacks and all of that stuff. I use it, and look at how wired I am at 8 at night. Jack Casey has written 2 books. Allegedly, a third one's coming. I don't know what any of them's about because I refuse to read them. Because if they're bad, then I'll feel bad for trying to get you to buy them. And if they're good, then I'll feel bad about making fun of them every week. The first book is The Royal Green. Second book is In Silver Throned. And then the third book is Crowned by Gold, which is supposed to be coming out summer of 2021. Summer's almost over. That's probably going to say coming soon. So if you want to find out why that third book hasn't come out, you got to buy the first 2 by going to theroyalgreen.com. Fierce Luxury by Ashley, high-end bags and accessories. Fierce Luxury is a high-end bag and accessory consignment store based on the internet. They carry the hottest brands like Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Gucci, and Hermes. Consign with them for a 30% fee, which is 20% less than most consignment stores, I'm told by Ashley. And why would she lie? She has no interest here. Find them online at fierceluxurybyashley.com and on Facebook in their exclusive group, fierceluxurybyashley.com. And then speaking of fierce, I guess, Adderpan, the most horrifying game ever. Available on Steam for only $5 plus the cost of therapy for the rest of your life. Adderpan is an absolutely horrifying game that I refuse to play because I watched a gameplay video of it and that was scary enough. It's filled with jump scares, as they call it, or as I like to call it, existential crises. I don't know what the appeal to this game is, but if you want to be horrified for the rest of your life, then go get Adderpan. It's only $5. You'll have so much more money to have to deal with the trauma that came from this. If you feel like suing me after listening to these ads, then I got bad news for you because I already have the attorney I'm going to countersue you with. But if you have something else you want to sue someone about that isn't me, then go to chrisreynoldslaw.com. Personal injury attorney Chris Reynolds, attorney at law. But if you're in Florida, if you're not in Florida, you got to find someone else. He is a licensed Florida personal injury attorney. And if you are personally injured, he will get you just so much money. I can't guarantee that, but he's going to try his best. He's a good guy. He's a good attorney. Good legal mind. chrisreynoldslaw.com. The intro and outro music to this and every episode of My Fellow Americans comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook, on SoundCloud. Go to his Bandcamp. Go to jodavimusic.bandcamp.com. Buy his entire discography. His new album just dropped. It's going to be like $25 for every song the man's ever made. It's going to be a delight. You're going to love it. I'd like to thank Le Bleu for this delicious water that I'm drinking today. I don't know why I treat them like a sponsor. I pay for this water. It's good. Good though. Shout out to Taron Turks' mom and him as always. Folks, my guest tonight is an incredible guy. I'm actually going to be campaigning with him in just a couple of weeks. He is a libertarian international economist, an active duty police officer, and he's also a Libertarian Party candidate for Congress to serve Florida's 20th district. He has been a police officer in Broward County, Florida since 2010 and a registered libertarian since 2011. His prior career in finance and economics included work with banks, the White House Office of Management and Budget, international development agencies, federal agencies, and trade associations. This guy's basically smarter than me, and we're going to find out just how much smarter than me over the next hour. He has traveled in 35 countries. He's taught economics at 3 universities. He holds a BS in aeronautical engineering and an MDA from Rensselaer Polytechnic in Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I can't even pronounce where this man has degrees from. And an MS and PhD degrees in economics from George Washington University. This is possibly the smartest human being I've ever had on this show. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, please welcome to the show, Mr. Mike ter Maat. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Spike, you make me laugh. As my dad used to say, if you were so smart, you wouldn't need all those fancy degrees. No, I am not smarter than you are. If I were smarter than you are, I probably would have advised you to hire Chris Reynolds before joining a sponsorship relationship with Adderpan. I think that looks like a good product, actually.
Yes.
And I think your audience is going to be able to handle it if any audience could. But if someone does need therapy, they're going to come after you, and you're going to be on the phone with Chris.
That's a good point. See, and that's what I said. I used to say, if you want to sue me, use Chris Reynolds. And then I thought, no. If you want to sue me, I'm using Chris Reynolds. You have to use someone else. So, folks, be sure to comment in the chats with your thoughts and questions. And Mike and I will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, Mike, before we get started, you are both a libertarian and a police officer. And when we first posed this, it posed you as being my next guest in, first of all, publicly today, but even before that, in our members only group.
Yeah, you say that like that's two different things.
Well, no, it is. We have kind of our group of the elite members, and then we also have like the public posts and pages we put out. And we heard over and over again everything from, wow, I can't wait to hear from a libertarian who's a police officer and get his perspectives, to there is no such thing as a libertarian police officer. How dare you? I hate you. I'm quitting this group, and everything in between. And so we're certainly going to talk a lot about that. But tell us that story of how you became, because you actually became an officer before you became a libertarian. Tell us that story of how you went from being the smartest human being in the history of mankind, who also apparently ran the White House's budget, which, I mean, we can talk about some of the issues there, but all the things you've done in economics, what ended up leading to you becoming a cop and then becoming a libertarian? Tell us the Mike ter Maat Genesis story.
Oh my goodness, I'll tell you the story, but I'm going to give you the condensed version. I'm 60 years old, and this is only an hour program. Look, I was probably a libertarian at heart, like most libertarians. I think I was a libertarian at heart for many, many years before joining the party, right? Most of us are optimistically rooting for one party or the other to come through and do something right by us, and are just constantly disappointed until we throw in the towel and realize that the Libertarian Party is the only way to go. Look, being a police officer is something that I wanted to do since a long, long time ago. When I was in graduate school in 89, 90, 91, I took the entrance exam for the Washington, D.C. Police Department and decided that it just wasn't enough money in those days, and still isn't probably enough money to do the job in Washington these days. That's one underfunded department that struggles to take care of police officers. So good luck to everybody there. Okay. And finally decided that when I was 48, the timing is not going to get any better. I was no spring chicken then. I'm no spring chicken now, and figured if I don't jump all over the opportunity, that the opportunity was going to escape from me. Look, I don't think being a libertarian and being a cop are really two different things. In my mind, whether in the mind of everyone in your audience or not, I don't know yet. But in my mind, I'm a professional libertarian. I am sworn to my duty to protect your rights. And I would go so far as to say most every cop I know feels that way, whether they use the word libertarian or not. But police officers become police officers by and large because they want to help people, and specifically in the realm of protecting people's rights, whether that's keeping people out of harm's way, protecting them from other people who would infringe upon their rights. And of course, being a good cop means learning how to not go too far and to protect people's rights, even from ourselves as police officers.
That's fair enough, and I get that perspective on it. And the chat is everything from "this sounds fantastic" to again, there is no such thing as a libertarian.
To go pound sand.
Yeah, we're going all the way off. Basically, everyone is arguing over whether you're not a real libertarian or not a real cop. So we're gonna dive into which of those you're not. But let's talk about this for a minute. So one thing I think it's probably good to focus on. I think where we probably agree most, and you've talked a lot about how the roles of unions and collective bargaining in police department, in really in public employees in general, but specifically here for police, how that actually makes things worse for policing. Can you dive into your thoughts on that? We're going to dive more into the real core issues here, but I want to kind of get your thoughts on the outset of some of the reforms you would want to see in the police.
Sure. I think the big picture for me, especially as an economist, is that we would prefer that the labor market for police officers were more like labor markets in other industries.
Okay.
In other words, we'd like to see not only on the upside for police officers competition for good officers, but we'd like to see situations in which bad officers are held accountable, for the markets to be such that it weren't so difficult to fire bad officers. In any other industry, someone who doesn't perform very well disappears from the industry, right? Or finds their way down the ladder of opportunity one way or another.
Right.
And it's no secret that public sector unions and unions in general can sometimes, I would say usually, make it very sticky in terms of holding professionals accountable, whether that's, in terms of firing someone or differential pay. Like with teachers, we don't have the flexibility to pay good officers more and bad officers less, right? And a lot of, I think, what police officers negotiate for through their unions is stability for a variety of reasons that we can get into. Teachers, the same thing.
Okay. And so one thing we talked about back when you were on the Muddy Waters of Freedom a couple months back,
Sure.
you had mentioned the fact that there's no portability. There were a couple things you talked about. Number one, there was no portability. So you have a situation where a police officer...
In many places, that's right.
Where a police officer, same thing with teachers as well, they'll have worked however many number of years, and if they move to another area, then they end up starting from scratch with base pay and everything else. And then you also talked about the fact that, and this kind of goes to the issue of like qualified immunity and liability insurance, that we want professionals not to do harm, but we also recognize that even good professionals will sometimes even accidentally do harm or mistakenly do something. Like, so for example, with doctors, they will have malpractice insurance because even if they screw up, they don't lose everything as a result. But bad doctors who keep having claims eventually can't get insured, which means they aren't able to be doctors.
At the very least, your rates are going to go up and you're going to be priced out of the market. And it's exactly how we would like the market to eventually work for police officers. I think everyone recognizes that qualified immunity is going to go away.
Okay.
It's already going away, and Colorado has already made great strides, and other states are stepping in that direction. So whether police officers like it or not, whether all of us understand it or not, and it's a complicated issue, and most legislators don't understand it, most police officers don't understand it, but qualified immunity is going to go away. And that'll leave us in a situation in which we need to either be indemnified in some sense or acquire liability insurance, malpractice insurance, just like any other high liability industry, the leading example being doctors, right? Surgeons, as you brought up. And that's how we would want the market to work. If you're bad at your job, you're going to eventually get priced out because you're not going to be able to afford the insurance. And insurance companies will add a layer of accountability, even where cities and other counties, states, other employers find it difficult to do so because of union contracts. Not so will be the case with insurance companies. They're not going to be held back by BS in a union contract, or else you won't be able to get the insurance in the first place.
Right.
So that's important. And the other element to that is that our elected leaders, our city leaders, county leaders, state leaders need to be much more involved in the contracting process. They need to be bargaining for the things that they need. And frankly, the police officers need to rebuild trust between police departments, between police officers, and the communities that we serve. It's obvious that we've lost a lot of trust in both directions over the last several years. I would argue that we've lost a lot of trust slowly for decades, but recently, quickly.
Well, recently, quickly, honestly, I think the biggest reason has been not necessarily a new development in how police officers have acted, but this. Everyone's walking around with HD cameras now.
Absolutely.
So we went from a vast majority of the public just taking the police officer's word for it to now we see this over and over and over again. And even if that's still, and I don't think anyone claims the majority of police interactions result in police brutality or even a large minority. But when you keep seeing it over and over again,
but a large proportion of the things that go wrong get seen thousands of times.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And while as a police officer, I suppose, you can be offended that folks get a biased view because of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In terms of public policy, for the worst things to get seen most. And obviously, as a police officer, just as a citizen, I like to see on TV the good things that happen too, right? I like to see kids being saved from burning buildings. But as a matter of public policy, the things that maybe we can do something about, or at least try to do something about, the bad things, those are the things that we need to focus on.
Right. No, I've never seen anyone say, you know what burns me up is when I see a police officer arrest a rapist or, save someone from pull someone out of a car, a crashed car before first responders can get there.
And in fairness to cops, that happens every day.
No, and I know that. And that's there's two aspects here. And I think one big thing, and it's something that's not really worth beating around the bush on this, especially since we are libertarians. One of the biggest problems is that a lot of what police are doing are enforcing things that we as libertarians don't think should be crimes anyway. That we're enforcing.
Absolutely.
So can you talk about that? Can you talk about that?
Sure.
The victimless crime aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with crimes in which there are victims and tell you what a police officer would say if the victim doesn't show up or the victim doesn't want to press charges. We always say no victim, no crime, right? Even if there was a victim and there was a crime, when the victim says, I don't want to press charges, or the victim just won't cooperate, right? And says, I don't want to talk to you. The conversation at that point is kind of over, because if you don't have a victim, you don't have a crime.
Right.
But when it comes to these victimless behaviors, and most of what we're talking about today is drug related, right?
In general, yeah.
And that's at the moment the most important example. We can talk about prostitution, for example, also, and a couple of other things. But the big thing before the public right now is deciding to what extent we want to decriminalize behaviors surrounding drugs.
Right.
When it comes to this, the state still wants people to be prosecuted, even though there isn't an identifiable victim. Right. And so for most police officers, that just naturally rubs you the wrong way a little bit, right? Because you're used to being able to identify a victim. And the other issue that goes hand in hand with that from a police officer's perspective is that we know how many people are affected negatively by a wide variety of drugs, right? Neither you nor I are going to try to convince each other that the United States doesn't have an opiate addiction problem. To see that is to raise your concern. To fight it in a criminal sense and not be able to significantly affect that is frustrating and naturally eventually leads you to, there must be a better way to fight this, right? And I believe that police officers are likely to always be involved with whatever public response we want to have to drugs, to addiction, to any kind of illness.
Right.
But criminalizing it doesn't, as it turns out, doesn't help. So I think there's a couple of different ways that you can come at this. You can come at this strictly as a libertarian and say, what I do with my body is my business, and you all can go pound sand, which is a great way to come at it, right? And as libertarians, that's our bread and butter. But as a police officer and as public health officials will tell you, criminalizing these behaviors doesn't help. In other words, there's another way to come at it rather than just a matter of ethics. There's a practical viewpoint, which is to say criminalizing it just doesn't help. It drives a wedge between police and our communities.
Well, and it creates cartels. Those cartels become powerful. They pay off government officials and police officers, which leads to corruptions, not just when it comes to drugs, but to everything else. There was recently a documentary called White Boy Rick, which details how the city of Detroit, from the mayor and police chief all the way down, frame this 16, 17-year-old white kid and say that he's like a low-level drug dealer who actually was originally a federal informant. They frame him to say he's the drug kingpin so they can lock him up and say, look, we fixed the drug problem. And it was just to distract from from the drug dealers that were actually paying them off. Addiction gets worse because addicts can't get help. And then, yes, it leads to officers enforcing, and we can talk about the war on drugs, the war on guns, all of these things. It leads to officers enforcing, spending a good bit of their time enforcing things that shouldn't even be crimes. It also leads to things like, for example, no-knock raids. There's no justification for a no-knock raid unless the justification is, well, they might flush something down the toilet. Well, you're not going to flush a murder or a rape down the toilet. They're talking about drugs. And so these are the types of things, civil asset forfeiture, all of these things sprang forth from the war on drugs. So ending the war on drugs, ending the wars on victimless crimes, also, whenever people say to me, well, don't you want officers that are out there stopping, rapes and murders? Yes, that's all that I want officers doing is out there protecting lives, rights, and property. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing. You want the role of being a police officer to be nothing other than protecting lives, rights, and property. Oh, I think I lost him. But this actually happened when we were talking earlier, and he was able to come back. So in the meantime, I'm going to actually, while we're waiting to see if, I think I lost him completely. Yeah, looks like I lost him completely. Let me see if he comes back on. In the meantime, I'm going to address some of the things that are in the comments. I know some of you guys were getting a little impatient that I wasn't talking about some of the core issues yet. I wanted to talk about Mike's policies first when it comes to what he wants to see changes, and then get into the beer. But literally, the next thing I was going to be bringing up when he, let me stop the spikeception in the corner here. One of the things the thing I was going to bring up next until I lost him just now was to talk about. Let me just keep this up in case he comes back. One of the things I was going to talk about is in the time, and hopefully when he comes back we can address this. Now that we do have the war on drugs and we do have the war on guns, we do have all these different things, in that kind of situation, does that mean that you don't, if you're being consistent with libertarian principles as a police officer, does that mean that you don't enforce those things? Does that mean you look the other way? Does that mean you just put less priority on it? Does that mean you do the bare minimum of what you have to do and actively advocate to end those things? What exactly does that look like to him? And I want to make sure I don't want to misrepresent what he's saying. And then the next thing is, and this was brought up by dank and salty drift memes, the concern that, okay, if they end the war on drugs, now what's to say that they don't, go find some other victimless crime? And I think that's the core issue we need to be talking about. Mike is actually back. Let's see if we can get him back on. Hold on one second. I just want to make sure I can connect with him. Hey, are you back? Can you hear me?
I can. Did
Okay,
you bump
cool.
me out, or did I bump you out?
I think you bumped me out, but that's okay. We are still live. I'm going to bring you back in. And
My apologies. I switched devices. I hope that helps. I don't know what went wrong.
no, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. That'll work great. And we can make that work. So we were talking about how, these victimless crime laws, they create more problems. Specifically, the war on drugs creates more problems when it comes to, the worsening
Absolutely.
of
It causes people not to call the police when they need to also, which leads to medical problems. It causes people not to get the treatment that they might be able to find if police officers were involved in a more positive way, and if people trusted police officers to be involved in a more positive way. So there are real life solutions that are blocked off for any number of people just because they're afraid to call 911.
Right, and they get over criminalized, so now they can't get, they can't start a business legally, and they, all these other we could sit here and talk all day long about how the war on drugs is bad. Here is what has been asked probably, I would say 1,000 times in the comments. Everyone's basically saying, and I mean, I could read each of these, but it's pretty much
Summarize.
It's pretty much summarized as this. Yes, we agree that these types of laws need to be gotten rid of and these reforms need to happen. In the meantime, while, for example, the war on drugs exists, the war on guns exists, these victimless crime laws exist, laws that we consider to be illegitimate, unconstitutional, infringing, as a police officer and a libertarian, and again, this has been worded multiple ways, how do you square that? Is it that you don't enforce those things, or you do the absolute bare minimum while advocating for an end to them? As a libertarian and a police officer, how do you square that circle between your principles and what your job is as it is right now?
You mean as a personal matter in my own particular situation is what you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, you advocate for how you'd like the laws to change. My job is to enforce the law, so I don't have that much flexibility in certain situations. Right. Yeah, you try to go with as light a touch as possible. As you said, the bare minimum. You go with a light touch, you try to be as helpful as possible. When someone commits a felony and you have probable cause to believe it to be so, you don't have a lot of flexibility. It doesn't matter whether I'm there, another officer, doesn't matter what your political association, affiliation, or feelings are. It just is what it is.
Right.
And the state of Florida is going to get its pound of flesh, whether it uses you, Mike, as a police officer or any other police officer. Remember that police officers are employees. And as much as we might get upset, angry, or frustrated with the way certain things work, being upset with the employees carrying out the policies, in my view, can be a frustrating proposition, right? We want certain laws to change, and I probably want certain laws to change in different ways than someone else because I'm more familiar with them. But do I have complete flexibility in this regard? No, absolutely not. And for some people, that means this is is not an appropriate career. If you if you are unable to carry out the role, there are so many upsides to pursuing a career as a police officer, that on balance, I find that it's worth it. And the education that I've gotten from having done it, to be honest, for me personally, has been extraordinary, because so many of these issues, I was not personally involved with until after becoming a police officer. My view on what should be criminalized and what should not be criminalized has probably not changed all that much, but the reasons and what's behind it and the damage that is done by criminalizing certain things that I believe shouldn't be, that has changed in me personally quite a bit. I see how things don't work in a way that I wish that they would if they weren't criminalized.
Yeah, and that's so I agree with you that obviously, we all advocate for this thing. I think where the disagreement might come in, and we're seeing a lot of this in the comments, that obviously you do have the choice to resign from being a police officer. Now, when you're saying that you, on the balance, see more negative, more positive than negative, obviously besides having employment, what are some of those specific positives that you see that outweigh the fact that you're doing things that by your own belief are infringing on the lives, rights, and properties of others?
Every single day I interact with anywhere from a dozen to many dozen people in my jurisdiction in ways in which I try to add value to their lives. Whether they, see it that way or not, in every single instance, I have no way of evaluating. But people have real life.
Oh, come on. This is a really good conversation to be having, and this is not fun. So hopefully he comes back.
What's that?
Are you there? Are you back? Oh, you came back this time. Okay, good.
I didn't know I disappeared.
Yeah, no, I lost you for quite a bit there. So you were saying that you come across quite a few people on a day-to-day basis, and you're able to positively affect their lives as an officer in other things, in the things where you're enforcing crimes and interacting with the public. Enforcing laws
remember
that have a victim
drugs. Right. Drugs is such a small part of my job, is to be vanishingly tiny, statistically speaking. Right. It just, look, in the last, let me say in the last 4 or 5 years, I have performed CPR on people with overdoses more often than I've arrested people.
Okay. And I definitely do get that. I will say, as a libertarian, and I know you probably empathize with this as well, it's hard to square that circle, right? Like it's hard to square yes, there are good things that are being done. There are people whose lives are being saved and everything else. Where obviously a lot of libertarians are going to have difficulty is when it comes to the part that, even again, that you also recognize is the thing that is that infringement. Honestly, I'm not sure that there is a way to. I'm not sure there was a way to resolve this specific, I guess, disagreement, other than agreeing to disagree.
Well, I would say aspect, not so much disagreement. There's an aspect to the job of which, I don't have a great deal of appreciation. It's just part of the job. And it goes hand in hand with, aspects of any other job that you don't like. In this particular case, it runs against my political principles. And most people don't have jobs in which their political principles even come into play. So I would ask most of your audience, right, who is questioning whether or not a libertarian should take a job as a police officer, to ask themselves, when's the last time their political principles were challenged by their job? And I'm guessing that for 80% of our audience, the answer is never, right? I am a big believer in public service. Full out. Public service, in many cases, requires public policy. Public policy requires political principles. So if you're going to believe in public service enough to take a job in it, almost assuredly you're going to end up in a situation in which part of the job runs counter to your political druthers. It's that way whether you're a firefighter or, you know, you're a soldier or you're a sailor or an airman. If you work on budgets for your city, I used to work as an economist for the White House. Did I see things that I hated? Listen, I was there when my boss's 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 boss, George Herbert Walker Bush, went back on his read my lips, no new taxes pledge at Andrews Air Force Base and agreed to what I think everyone was willing to call a tax increase in some sense. A lot of us were upset by that. We were upset because he had said he wouldn't. We were upset because we didn't want new taxes. If your audience would like to say I blew it by not storming out of, you know, the new executive office building across the street from the White House and grabbing a sign and protesting, then that's fine. But as a public servant, I do the best job I can.
And that's fair. I get what you're saying. I will say, here's a question I have, because there's been a few different things people have said here. Some people have said that you made a good point about the job thing. Some people have said that recently they did have to have where their moral principles were called into the question about enforcing mandates, and that they chose to refuse to do it and either had to resign or get demoted. There are people, I guess maybe
and
my
good
two
for
questions,
them. That happens, and I have all kinds of respect for that.
Yeah. So I guess my thing is, because I will say I'm not a fan of the doing my job defense. But let me ask you this: is there a law or order or something that maybe isn't even on the books that if it were implemented, you would say, no, I can't do that, and if I have to do that, even if on the balance I feel like the other things I'm doing are a net positive to my community, this I can't do? Are there things that you would say, no, I can't do this, and I simply have to resign?
Well, of course, and maybe you meant that as a softball. You know, no police officer that I know, not just myself, but no police officer I know is going to exert more violence than is necessary. No police officer that I work with is going to make an arrest without probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed for which, you know, the state of Florida says is an arrestable offense. So yes, we are limited all the time by our principles and how we view the Constitution, both the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Florida. And none of us are going to go beyond that. Indeed, our city, I got to be a little bit careful here, right? But a couple years ago, our city decided to make the possession of cannabis a civil issue. And we were to pass out civil citations for first possession offense, and the amount of penalty for each citation would escalate for the second, third, fourth, fifth offenses. And the way it appeared to me and a number of other officers, what this was just extortion, right? And in answer to your question, we didn't do it. The good news, I suppose, for the employment of us was that the city eventually backed down, not explicitly, but implicitly. The program was just sort of shelved for lack of execution. That's a fairly soft example, right? I didn't have to go on television and, you know, say we're not doing this and make a big brouhaha over it. It was just
Right.
something that was
It just
quietly
quietly went
tanked.
away. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, you know, that was fairly easy and mild. But for the most part, the good news is we're not put in too many situations. And like I say, you know, we don't arrest people for weed anymore as a practical matter. It just almost doesn't happen.
And no, and I know that's true, especially in Florida. That's largely true. But for example, someone who I met going across the country last year. I went to like 35 states. I was across the country, and I met a lot of veterans, a lot of people who have gotten in accidents. For whatever reason, they ended up with a chronic pain issue. And so they ended up, and this was a story I heard over and over again. They ended up on pain pills because they had a chronic pain issue that wasn't actually resolvable. It was because of a permanent injury or some neurological damage or something like that. And they would end up on
Right.
pain pills, and then eventually they'd hit their FDA limit on pain pills, and they'd be told, "No more pain pills, cold turkey now. We're gonna have to figure out non-drug ways to manage your increasing pain." Which they couldn't do. So now they're resorting to buying the same
Happens all the
pills
time.
illegally, buying the same pills illegally. And often because they are losing money doing this, they often don't have work because of their pain issue. They are often now having to sell the pills or basically sell enough of them to be able to afford their own pills until eventually they realize it's actually
And the story is
more
a great
affordable.
example of why it needs to be decriminalized, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the meantime, um, what is the thought
Justice
process? Because
reform matters.
absolutely. But in the meantime, in a situation where you're having to arrest someone for example, trafficking heroin, when the reality is, you know, this is an addict who has multiple baggies of heroin, either because it's for personal usage or it's because they're having to sell a certain number of them to maintain an addiction they have because right now they don't have a legal recourse. I guess I'm
Right.
trying to get in the mindset of what it is you have to and not just, and this isn't, I'm not trying to call you out specifically. This is talking
No,
about
no,
police
but the
officer,
situation
the
a police
enforcement.
officer would find himself in.
Right.
There's,
What is the thought process there?
yeah. Well, yeah, you can try to downplay it a little bit, but you know, what presents itself presents itself. This is, you know, in many situations, and this, of course, is a problem with the law, is that there's a limited amount of discretion that you have as a legal matter, right? And not just an employment matter, but as a legal matter. And so, what you can do is refer this to drug court, which in Broward County can be fairly effective in treating situations differently because there are a couple of judges who are relatively sensitive to the story that you just told, for example.
Right.
So we can scooch things in a direction that's more productive, thankfully, but not because necessarily the law has changed very much over the years, but because the courts have at least taken some steps to react in the right direction. And that's not to say, believe me, I'm not saying that, and therefore we don't need to decriminalize. We absolutely do. But various pieces of the justice system, which is large and complicated, have been trying to react in positive ways.
Yeah, and again, I've heard some both positive and negative things about drug court and similar arrangements. So I mean,
Yeah, it doesn't
obviously,
always work very well.
right? Yeah, and it probably is different from state to state as well. All that to say,
It's
I think
different from county to county.
oh, I'm sure, and from person to person and judge to judge and everything else. Obviously, I mean, I think we've both made our points here in terms
Yep.
of the enforcement versus disobedience. I think that actually the one thing I do want to say, and is kind of touching on something you said, and then we can get into the economic stuff. But
Yep.
for example, you mentioned the fact that when the officers when there was the change to how marijuana was going to be arrested and treated, the officers largely refused to enforce it, and it just kind of quietly went away as a policy because they knew that there wasn't an appetite for the officers to enforce it. In a similar manner of how if a certain percentage of the population engages in civil disobedience, the government often just abandons trying to enforce it because they don't really have the ability to enforce it for no other reason. With that said, does that not mean that if enough officers wanted to, they could refuse to enforce the war on drugs or the war on guns or the war on sex work and say, no, we aren't willing to do this. We're willing to go against, a violent street gang or something like that, but we're not willing to enforce a truly victimless crime, just because it involves drugs or just because it involves guns. Is it not true that there could also be a refusal to enforce there?
Yes, to a certain extent anyway. It's difficult to explicitly coordinate that sort of thing, right? It's much more viable as a strategy, I have found, and other officers have found, to, how shall I say, put your energies in other directions, right? A lot of criminal police work is the result of proactive dedication of your own personal resources. And so pushing in one direction or another gets you away from certain things. So to the extent to which, you spend more time working on those calls that are domestic violence in nature, for example, you do have a little bit of influence about not dedicating quite as much activity toward other things. And as a department as a whole, we have that to a certain extent.
Okay. I'm going to, like I said, I think rather than have us for 2 hours go back and forth talking about largely the same thing, I think everyone, including the people in the comments, have made our points here. And I think we all get each other's points here. I don't think there's anyone who's mistaken as to what someone's saying or not. I'll close this on two different comments that were made kind of in favor of and against what you said. One said something along the lines, I forget where it was, someone saying this basically, they perceived it as a just following orders response. But then someone else, Nate Berg, actually said if everyone with any libertarian ideals quit, then you would only have officers left who had no libertarian ideals, and that nothing's all or nothing, and that would be a net worse. I think everyone can get each other's arguments. I think it's clear how each one of us thinks on these things.
And if I would summarize what I have to say, it is I'm a big believer in public service.
That's fair.
And this is the way I choose to do it.
And I get that, and I believe that you are trying to do this for the that you're doing it for a public service reason, even if there are some obvious civil liberties concerns and things like that. When it comes
that we all share. I don't think anyone in your audience is going to try to kid him or herself that I became a police officer, or very many others become police officers because they want to arrest people for drugs, right? That's not a thing.
I doubt it. I doubt it. The question becomes, now that it is, then what? With that said, I want to end where we agree. We need to get rid of the victimless crime laws so that this isn't even a discussion anymore. Like if a police officer's job is only to protect lives, rights, and property, then 99% of this argument goes away. Now we're just talking about what to do with officers who could remain bad actors, and we pretty much largely agree on that. Let's going to the kind of getting into the economic end of it, because you are also an economist. A lot of criminal justice issues often lead to poverty, or enforced poverty. And something that you actually are running on is on looking at how the criminal justice system, being often heavy-handed, especially with poorer people, leads to and enforces the existing poverty system. Can you kind of dive into that and what you would want to see change in that?
Yeah, and I think one useful place to start is to talk about the war on poverty as it was launched in the 1960s, right?
Okay.
And I would argue that most of us, certainly back in the 70s, when I came of age, were optimistic, naively, right? As kids, we were optimistic that throwing money at certain types of problems would lead to something good. And that's the basic nexus of the war on poverty, is that if you made resources available to people who are in poverty, that would give them a way out of poverty.
Right.
And the other piece of it was what that developed into in counter to that. Talk about the 1980s, talking about the Reagan years. We then began believing that a rising tide would lift all boats, right? And we were very optimistic and naive about that as well. As it turns out that a rising tide does not lift all boats. We see a great deal of mobility in our economy from one strata to another, everywhere except for the bottom. In other words, we see people going from middle class to upper class and upper class to middle class all the time. We see some people escaping poverty every year, but not the kind of mobility that you see in the rest of the economy. The bottom of our economy works differently than the rest of it. And the one thing that I have learned from looking at economic development, both in the United States and elsewhere, and of course, following this as a police officer on road patrol for the past 11 years, truly poverty is a political phenomenon. Poverty not only is in many cases caused by bad public policy, but it is locked in to what I would characterize as persistent intergenerational poverty, the kind of poverty that leads from one generation to the next. It's very difficult to escape over a long, long period of time. So if you start out looking at folks in difficult situations, the first thing you notice is that poverty is a geographic concept, right? Poverty is concentrated in certain places, and that leads to crappy public schools and an absence of private schools, and until recently, a complete absence of charter schools, which is a fairly recent phenomenon for which we're all eternally grateful. But because public schools have a virtual monopoly, locally speaking, over the use of public funds, face no competition, it's very difficult for the problems of public schools to be corrected. There's just no economic force driving them to do so.
Right.
And that limits all kinds of opportunity, right? Not only does it limit economic opportunity, it actually limits, in some cultural sense, even aspirations for what most people would consider economic development. Most people that graduate from the worst public schools, including those in Broward County, where they truly are bad, most folks wouldn't even recognize the economic opportunities that are made available to people graduating from private schools and from good public schools elsewhere in the United States. When you combine that with our criminal justice system, which, as you and I were just discussing, criminalizes some very basic victimless adult behaviors, you get people seeking opportunities to make money in street crime. Street crime comes from the combination of bad public schools and prohibition, right? Street crime, lack of economic opportunity, a number of other bad public policies that we have in place. We still at the federal level subsidize the breakup of the nuclear family, unfortunately. We subsidize the concentration of housing at the lower end of the spectrum. We have zoning ordinances that preclude integration of low and high income families. We do all kinds of things to make it difficult. And what we find is that the justice system plays a major role, not just because it sweeps up so many people through the criminalization of things that shouldn't be criminalized, but of course our sentencing is so much heavier than the rest of the world,
Right.
that we find other ways to break up families, to undermine economic development, to undermine entire communities. And that leads to tough parenting situations. Tough parenting situations leads to problems in school. And so you see the cycle continue.
Yeah.
And there's the cycle. And I wish that weren't the case, right? I'm not trying to suggest that breaking the cycle is easy. It's not. It's a lot easier to describe than to fight. Plenty of people on the right like to describe this as a fairly simple problem. All you need to do is graduate, get a job, work hard, don't get pregnant until after you're married, and your life is going to be good.
Right.
Yeah, that's easier said than done if you graduate, or more importantly, don't graduate from a bad public school. A lot of people I find down here in District 20 or any of the other number of places where I've either worked or visited in pockets of poverty, a number of people will tell you, well, you know, even if public funds were available to private schools, we still wouldn't have private schools here. We don't have any private schools now, right? So it wouldn't do us any good. Well, the truth of the matter is that private schools, if they know nothing else, they know which side of their bread gets buttered, right? It's no coincidence that the private school that I was able to send my daughter to, notwithstanding the mortgage on the house I had to get to pay for it, was in a wealthy community. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
If you were to make public funds available to private schools in District 20, I can guarantee you the Archdiocese of Miami would take notice. There would be private schools there in due course, and it wouldn't take a generation.
Well, and it's interesting because the concept of school choice, which is basically what you're describing, it's actually just, it's sort of like Medicare for all, but for education. So like what we currently have is like the equivalent of the VA, where the government doesn't just control the funds and funding, but they actually control the mechanism. It's the delivery. It's actual socialization of an entire service. They've controlled the means of production. And a step down from that, while still having the government controlling the funding and essentially, for lack of a better word, robbing us to pay for it, it at least is being assigned to the parent, and the parent is deciding where it goes. So where
that's exactly right.
Medicare
it's a stepping
would be
stone. It's a stepping stone to getting the government out of education completely eventually.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Which can't happen all in one step. Indeed, making public funds available for private schools is something that can't even happen in one step. We have to go through the charter school step to get there.
Yep.
And thank goodness charter schools have now demonstrated, the argument should be over, but it won't be over for many years. But the argument should be over because charter schools outperform traditional public schools, full stop. And that's the case whether they're unionized or not, by the way. So one interesting finding, interesting to me as an economist, I have to admit I didn't see this coming. The teacher unions themselves, although they're a political problem, they're not the primary problem in delivering good education. The charter schools that are unionized, it turns out, also do a damn good job of outperforming traditional public schools.
Yeah, no, it's not even close. Like it's not even close in terms of the metrics, which is why the public sector unions are doing everything they can to fight it. Kyle Hagan is mentioning, he's saying trim up the black bars. Who's running my OBS? Kyle, when we lost Mike one of the times, he had to switch to another device, and it's apparently in portrait mode.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
No, it's fine. I don't want to take up any more time of the broadcast trimming it up and editing it. So we're just going to go with this.
No, thanks for mentioning.
Originally, it was in the right thing. And talking about the criminal justice aspect of that, Mike, when someone is criminalized, looking at the kids, they're robbed of at least one parent. for the time that they're in prison, which could be many years, especially if they've been, multiple times of getting hit on victimless crimes. And now they're in jail. They come out. They're unable to vote. They're unable to own a weapon. Often they're unable to be able to get work in entire career industries.
Entire industries are closed off.
Yeah, entire industries are closed off. They're unable to get a business license. So are you in favor of, and I'm not sure if it's either, I guess along with ending these wars on victimless crimes, also giving like a type of an amnesty to those who were previously convicted of just those crimes, not those crimes and some kind of violent offense or something, but having specifically those crimes removed from people's records so they can have a clean slate?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that you should carry a record for something that is currently not illegal. To me, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
In other words, it has to be, in a sense, retroactive.
Yeah. This is a very interesting...
Which is a shame, right? Because right now there are people incarcerated, and for a long period of time, for things that will soon no longer be illegal.
Or in some cases are already legal. So we have some states
in some cases already legal. That's actually true.
With marijuana, in some cases, there are people that are in prison for selling, and the justification is, well, but there was no structure.
It was illegal at the time, and you broke the law.
It was illegal at the time, and there was no way for them to have the licensing, and they never could have afforded it. They're literally arguing that because they were poor, they should be in jail for something that a rich person's now allowed to be able to do.
Right, and I understand the counter argument, right? The counter argument is it was illegal at the time. But, in the same way that we need a pathway to citizenship for people who are in the United States illegally, right?
Yeah.
We need a pathway to amnesty. And Spike, you know as well as I do, amnesty is not the word that we're going to be able to use if we want political success in that arena. But yeah, we need a pathway to restoration of rights.
Yeah, and that's the best way to put it. Restoring people's rights that should have never been removed in the first place. I mean, to use an extreme example, there were people who used to have criminal charges for violating the Fugitive Slave Acts. Well, once chattel slavery, or at least once private sector chattel slavery was ended and replaced with public sector chattel slavery, there was, to have someone still have a criminal record or still be in jail for escaping their master, that was now a completely illegal arrangement. There would be no reason for them to have that. So same thing here.
Right. And there wasn't a pathway to the restoration of rights put in place then. It was a real shame, in my view.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. This is a very interesting situation in which we agree pretty much 100% when it comes to the reforms that need to be made. And I think the disconnect between us is that I believe that, and many of the people, and I will say in your defense, this is not one, I know you're not looking at the comments. It's not 100% people saying that they agree with me or disagree with you. It's fairly balanced. But I will say that I think the disconnect is, so if I know something is wrong, and I know that, and I will say that I don't believe it's just as simple as saying it's a political disagreement. So a political disagreement might be something like, a marginal tax rate or trade policy or something like that. I think when it comes to, for example, saying you have to be the person who actually goes and collects someone to be processed in the system that you're talking about, ultimately contributes to poverty and to overcriminalization and to stratification between the poor and literally everyone else. And not to mention the immediate damage and harm being done to them, not to mention all of the justifications for the growing police state and surveillance state that we have as a result of it. That's your job to go and do that in that moment. I wonder if, in addition to the advocating for that to end, that there isn't also something useful in saying, and in the meantime, I'm at least not going to prioritize that. My priority is going to be on the things that I think should be, and I encourage other officers to do the same, for us to prioritize what we actually want to do. And in doing so, demonstrate to the community that this is not a police officer thing, this is a politician thing. They want this stuff, we don't want to do it, and so we're basically doing everything we can to refuse to comply in our own right, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And behind closed doors, that's exactly what does go on. Every officer knows which officer is interested in pursuing drug crimes and which one is not. Which officers are the officers you want there with regard to any other type of situation. You know, you and I can go on and on about the hundreds of other types of calls that we go on, right? And so behind closed doors, that happens, and we have those types of conversations all the time, including ones that involve principles and politics and what we think ought to be legal and not legal. Our profession is not there in terms of, going public. If somebody wanted to take a stand that would lead to them being discharged, I would have every respect for that officer. But you would not be a police officer any longer. And for most people, that's fine. You know, I'm guessing that there's no one else in your audience who is a police officer, and that's fine. Most people aren't, right? But if you want to be a police officer, you got to take a little bit of it. And back to another point that you were making, to an economist, not all of those examples that you might political disagreements are that easy to choke down. To an economist, tariffs are pretty bad things. Some of the things that the World Bank used to do in terms of foisting debt upon nations in Latin America were pretty bad. And I spent a year working for the World Bank, and you have some ethical issues you got to wrestle with and ultimately decide not to pursue a career with them. But I knew economists at the Treasury Department who were quite pissed off at some of the things that whatever administration was in power was doing. But
and the real harm, and
you choose to try to make the changes you can from the inside and choke down the rest.
And the real acknowledging the real harms that happen as a result of that, of those, the real life consequences of those policies. No, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
I think this.
And by the way, I'm not trying to let myself off the hook. I'm just saying, life is hard, and we all do have to make tough decisions. And some of us are going to choose to pursue certain careers as challenging as they may be to wrestle with in your head.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I'm not sure I don't think we're going to necessarily agree on this point, which is what makes it even more important. It makes it more important. It makes it every bit as important as it was before this conversation started to end these things so that this argument doesn't even exist to begin with. So that we're now talking in some kind of academic sense instead of a real life sense. I do hope that in this conversation, and not just from you, but in everyone, that we recognize, or at least that there's a acknowledgement of the fact that I hope that we can see more pushback from people, because there are plenty of people in law enforcement who believe the war on drugs is good. They have bought, just like many non-officers, many civilians believe that the war on drugs is good. It's necessary, and it's, we have to stop all these addictions and all these drug dealers, and that this is a good way to do it. Despite all evidence to the contrary, they still believe it, and many officers still believe it as well. For those who don't, or for those who recognize something is wrong here, I do hope that I see more of not just an advocacy to end it, but of people saying, I don't want to do this. And if you want to have enough police officers to fill your ranks, we aren't going to do this. This needs to be at the very least deprioritized. In the same way that we've seen a lot of people who quit the military service once they're up to do so, once they're no longer in that enlisted period where they have to remain in. And even some who say, listen, then dishonorably discharge me or give me conscientious objector status or whatever it is, but I can't continue to do this. I believe that there are going to have to be many ways to fight the very, very profitable and very attractive to those who want power war on drugs and war on victimless crimes. I think it is going to take advocacy against bad laws. I think it is going to take people from within the inside, as it were, talking about this. But I do think there's going to have to be an aspect, in the same way there's going to have to be an aspect of civilian disobedience to it, there's going to also have to be an aspect of enforcer disobedience, to the extent of at least saying, this is not our priority. If you tell us our priority is beating people up for, menthols or loose cigarettes, we're not doing it. Like, or it's going to be so low on the totem pole that it might as well not being enforced. And I do hope to see more of that.
Right. Like what has happened with weed. Right.
Yeah, I do hope to see that, and I will say, I guess the last thing on this is, or that I'll say on it, is that one of the many different things that led to increasing talk of decriminalizing and legalizing drugs in, or specifically weed, and now hallucinogens and entheogens. I'm saying that wrong. The mushrooms and the hallucinogenic plants. Is that an increasing number of officers were saying, this is stupid, I'm not going to do it, this isn't helpful, it's harmful, and it became untenable for municipalities and states across the country to continue doing it, which led them to actually having a standoff with the federal government, which is it's kind of interesting. So I do think there's many aspects to it, and
yes, that was helpful. It's a good example.
Yeah, so I do hope that we have more of that. I don't believe that we should just say, well, while it's still the law, it is what it is and we have to do it. I think there needs to be an aspect of saying, okay, it's the law, and we may not be able to completely disobey enforcing, but in some cases we may have to disobey enforcing, or at the very least give a lot of pushback on it, and I do hope to see more of that.
Yep, well said.
Okay, so folks, there has been many opinions of people that like what we've said, people that have disliked what we've said, people that have liked what I've said, people that have liked what Mike said, and vice versa. You actually have an opportunity to talk with both of us about these things and anything else you want to do, because I'm actually going to be in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be in Florida with Mike ter Maat and Martha Bueno. Mike is obviously running for Congress. Martha Bueno is running for city commissioner in Miami. And so it isn't, oh, good. We're live and the things aren't pulling up. Anyway, this Friday and Saturday, I am going to be, or not this Friday and Saturday, next Friday
September
and Saturday,
3 and 4.
September 3rd and 4th, I am going to be in Fort Lauderdale and in Miami with Mike ter Maat and with Martha Bueno. In
and on the 5th with Martha, that's right.
Yeah, and we encourage you to reach out, come on out, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, ask us your questions, and listen to what Mike has to say, like it or don't like it. Mike has definitely a very unique perspective on this, and it's worth a listen. And you get to tell him what you think, what you think about it, positive or negative, directly to him. So where can people find out how to register for these events and to find out more about you as a candidate and everything else?
Well, they can go to first of all, the easiest place is the website, right? MikeTerMaat2022.com. You got to spell it right. MikeTerMaat 2022.com.
I'm going to put that in the notes. So Mike's website. Go ahead. I'm putting your site in so people.
And you can reach out to me directly, Mike at MikeTerMaat2022.com. You'll find my phone number on the website. That's my real phone number. The phone I carry with me in my pocket. Feel free to text me with any questions that you have. The events that we're going to have going on, I think, are going to be a lot of fun. Martha has a shooting event on the 5th. That's going to be a lot of fun. She's got something going on in the afternoon of the 4th, or the evening of the 4th. I get confused. And we have something going on in the afternoon of the 4th. We have a dinner on the 3rd. Spike is going to be at all of them. Yep. And as everybody knows, for those of you in the audience who have not dealt with Spike in person, I would suggest that you avail yourself of the opportunity, because he's a lot of fun. And, you find yourself agreeing and disagreeing, but there is one thing about Spike Cohen that should never be lost on anybody. And that is, Spike is one of those guys who recognizes that politics and libertarianism has got to be about making people's lives better. You know, it's not just about I hate this and I hate that and I wish people would leave me alone. Every conversation that Spike Cohen ever has, you can tell it's leading in the direction of, you know, how do we make things better? And that's what all of our conversations need to be about. So I encourage everyone to take the opportunity to meet Spike.
Well, thank you. That means a lot, Mike. And yeah, we believe what we believe because we recognize from a philosophical and moral standpoint that you shouldn't hurt people, you shouldn't take their things, you shouldn't subjugate them, you shouldn't order them around. For many people, before they can buy into that philosophy in as an actual political sense and not just as the axiom that it is, we shouldn't hurt people or take their stuff, you have to show how it actually works, because most of us did not start as libertarians. Neither I nor Mike started as libertarians. Most libertarians are not second generation or third generation libertarians. They became libertarians after having heard someone explain it well, or after reading something, or something happening in their life that changed their perspective, whatever it is. Up until then, if someone had told you these ideas, you might have said, yeah, that sounds great, but what about public safety? What about the roads? What about education? What about healthcare? What about housing? What about national security? Whatever your things were. We need to show that libertarianism not only is the right way to do this, libertarianism is not only the most moral way to do things, but it also makes the most sense. It also works the best. People working together voluntarily as stakeholders in a given situation are always going to work better than a situation that is centrally planned and democratized out to a bunch of people who have no stake, with coercion and threats and no accountability all the way around, right? So before I let you go, thank you again for coming on, Mike, and I appreciate your time. Before I let you go, I do want to give you a chance to say anything else you want to say, anything you thought we didn't touch on, anything you want to plug. I want to give you that chance, however long you need. Mike ter Maat, the floor is yours.
Well, I appreciate that. I think we covered all of the important ground. The reason that I got into this race in particular is because the issues that matter so much to the residents of District 20 are issues that have been important to me personally and professionally for a long, long time. Police reform and economic development, particularly in terms of defeating poverty, ending the war on poverty, and replacing it with common sense rules and legislation that lets people develop the economy the way it needs to be from the ground up instead of just throwing money at it. I had the opportunity to participate in a forum with the Democratic candidates a couple of nights ago. And I have to admit, notwithstanding having followed some of these people for years and having seen them in the news and online, it is breathtaking to be in a forum with them in real time and hear them talk about the way out of poverty is to go find contracts, go find money, spend more resources on this and that, and these families will somehow magically be able to climb their way out of poverty. It does not work like that. If it would, we would have solved poverty literally 40 years ago. So we know with certainty it doesn't work. We just have to convince people to take a fresh approach. And I believe that that's the same thing with criminal justice reform. We put into place a crime bill 25 years. I can't believe it's been so long. Democrats and Republicans alike were buying into it. People were optimistic. It didn't work. It turns out that sending people to jail for stupid things for long, long, long periods of time is no way to fight crime. It's just a way to bust up communities. We have to take a fresh approach to so many of these things. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to see the Democratic Party doubling down on the idea of the war on poverty, the same as it ever was, and claiming victimization of one group or another instead of helping people find ways to develop their own economies. And seeing the Republican Party just absolutely stand in the way of criminal justice reform, police reform in particular, and saying no just because they're not interested in the hard work of bringing police officers along as natural allies in the process, which we will be eventually. We just saw in the state of Washington legislation being moved without police officer involvement, and now everyone's all mad at each other because nobody understands what the other side really wants out of it. So politically, and in terms of communication, understanding what people need and understanding what voters are ready to hear, there is a tremendous amount of hard work ahead of us. And none of it is going to be solved with slogans like defund the police or, we're just not going to have reform at all. We are going to have reform. We're going to have the right kind, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of hard work, and we need to buckle up and get ready for it. So I appreciate, Spike, you giving me the opportunity to talk about it, and all the other folks that you support in local races around the country as well.
Well, thank you, Mike. And, Harry Brown said it best, 25, 30 years ago. Government is good at doing one thing. It walks up to people, it breaks their legs, it takes their wallet, it uses some of the money to buy them some crutches, and it says, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have those crutches. The criminal justice system, the regulatory capture, occupational licensing system, zoning system, all of that, and the enforcement mechanism behind it is the leg breaking and the wallet stealing. The war on poverty is that using some of it to buy them crutches, and it doesn't
That's exactly
work.
Right.
The answer to
I wish it would, right? How simple would the world be?
If the status quo fixed everything, we wouldn't even be here. It wouldn't be a problem. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. I look forward to talking with you more about it's a contentious subject when we talk about that divide between our principles and how to deal with it today. And I think it's an important conversation to have, and I look forward to continuing to have it with you, man.
It is. Thank you. Thanks for hearing it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Stick around. I'm going to talk with you during the outro. And how are you just now seeing America's Jew, Josiah? It's been there literally the whole time. America's Jew. I'm America's Jew. I used to be a local Jew, but I was the nominee of the third largest political party for vice president, making me America's Jew. So, folks, thanks again for tuning into this episode of My Fellow Americans. Join Matt Wright tomorrow on Thursday, and I'm speaking slowly so I can pull up who his guest is, because I always do this and I forget. On Thursday on the Writer's Block, his guest is Don Johnson. And is it that Don Johnson, or is it a Don Johnson who's running for city council in Somerville, South Carolina? You're not going to believe who it is. Tomorrow night at 8 p.m. on the Writer's Block. On Friday night, we are not having an episode of Cajun and Eskimo from Bio to Igloo. Join them next Friday. This Saturday, or this weekend, I'm free. I get to stay home. And then on Monday, join us for at 8 p.m. for an episode of Mr. America, The Bearded Truth. Jason Lyon will be delving into yet another major subject. And then next Tuesday, join us for the next episode of The Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events like the sweet little monkeys that we are. And then join me right back here next Wednesday, same Spike place, same Spike time. My guest will be rapper R.A. the Rugged Man. I am really excited about this. And then again, join me next weekend in Florida with Mike ter Maat and Martha Bueno. To find out more, go to MikeTerMaat2022.com. Folks, thanks again for tuning into this episode of My Fellow Americans. It was special because you were here, and we love you. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power. God bless, guys.
We might just unite and come together, become hybrid. at the least slightly like-minded. Indeed, the life I've lived brings light to kindness. All you need is a sign. Put a cease to the crimes. Put an ease to the minds like mine. Sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, bullet holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. Hold these tears, I close my eyes. Open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine. Caught up in them versus die. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Whom the tomb is flashing by. Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why.